Okay, so I think in terms of the EU elections, we're going to see a big change. We're going to see the nationalist populist parties making gains. I think far more than a third. I think we'll be up to maybe 40 to 45% gains, possibly even more. I think it's way underestimated how well they're going to do. I think what we've seen as well, which we've never seen in EU elections, is cross-country campaigning. So members of Five Star doing some campaigning in Poland and France with their partner parties, whether it's Marine Le Pen's or Orban's or the Swedish Democrats or Vox. So there's a great amount of cooperation now between people who have common interests throughout Europe. And so that I think is going to be a big shock, but we already knew that. Just to go back to the EU chart. As you know, the EU is a Scorpio with Leo rising and have this very malevolent configuration where they have Mercury conjunct Pluto conjunct Mars, where the Pluto-Mars conjunction is in exact square to Saturn on the descendant, in exact square to Moon in the 10th house in Taurus, and Mars, Pluto, Mercury in Scorpio, Sun in Scorpio. Okay, so when we look back at the history of the EU, which is only in this chart since 1993 from the Maastricht Treaty, when Mercury moved to be in exact conjunction with the Mars-Pluto opposite Moon, square Saturn, it was during Kosovo, so a war on the doorstep of Europe, right? When the Sun moved to conjunction, it was the financial crisis 2008-2009. When the Descendant moved to conjunction with it, it was the immigrant crisis from Syria and Brexit. So you can see every time that's triggered, there's a major crisis in the EU. This next coming year and a half, we have Jupiter conjunct it. So what does that signify? I think it's going to be three different things. Another financial crisis, obviously, no, we're not too worried about the immigration, another financial crisis, plus as we say, the turbulence with a total change in terms of the MEPs and the parliament, and also possibly conflict on the doorstep. And this time, I think it's going to be Ukraine. Two things that happened in Ukraine. We had the election of the so-called politician who used to be a comedian or a clown or something. Now, he is really just a puppet for an oligarch who's pulling his strings. The significant thing about that is it's a move away from that kind of ultra-nationalist, almost neo-Nazi group that were in control in Ukraine to a more moderate stance that is not as anti-Russian. If you remember, we had Yanukovych. As soon as Yanukovych moved towards being less aggro to Russia and moved away from the EU in the Russian direction, we had this orchestrated putsch or coup in order to install Poroshenko, who was much more pro-EU. Now Poroshenko's gone, but we have someone coming in who is likely not to be pro-Russia, but to try and bring the country together by moving a little bit more in that direction. It's only really 25% of the country in the kind of Habsburg area of Ukraine that is still incredibly ultra-nationalist. Now, the interesting thing is Ukraine is hosting the NATO 2020 conference in May next year. Now, there seems to be a huge push for Ukraine to join NATO. What's that going to mean? That's a massive provocation to Russia. That's NATO right up to their border in what they see as their heartland, in a country in which many nationals of Russia live, and in very pro-Russian sector of the community. That's a red rag to a bull, and that, I think, could spark the whole Ukraine conflict again, which brings us to what I say in the EU, again, a major conflict on the EU's border, and I think it's going to be Ukraine, the source of that conflict. The change in power and the change in shift again to not being pro-EU is going to reignite the conflict there, even though I think the plan is to bring the country back together. I think there's enough of resistance to Russia, resistance to that, and pro-EUism to tear it all apart. So that is where I see that coming in, and you know that relates to a prediction I made a while ago. But this NATO thing with Ukraine, big trouble, and it could definitely land us up with problems on the doorstep again, thanks to EU meddling and their own brand of imperialism. Thank you.